My kids love to run around, right? The little kids.
Yeah.
My youngest fell off his scooter going down a hill. It was ill-advised. I wasn't there. Yeah.
Is he okay?
Scraped up his arm and his leg. He is okay. He's got some road rash. We wrapped it up. Unfortunately, when I took the wrapping off, it also took a big chunk of the scab with it, which is not great. Yeah. So I had a very angry 5-year-old.
Yeah.
The reason I'm telling you this is to make you sad. It's when we were in the shower. I made him take a shower that night.
Sure.
He is yelling at me at the top of his lungs. You did this to me. This is your fault. And he's like and I just feel terrible.
Of course.
And I was just like, yeah, buddy, I did. I'm sorry.
Poor guy.
So later that night, I said to my wife, I was like, oh man, I feel terrible. I told him it wasn't going to hurt. And then it hurt him. And like, this is like the worst parenting day of my life. And she laughs and she goes, no, it's not. It's just the one that you remember. And I was like, no, there's no other.
Because she has some that she remembers.
Like I started thinking about it.
Much worse.
So I started thinking about it and I was like, oh, fuck, you're right. And she was like, what'd you think of? Like, we're literally so deep in, we don't even know which one the other one's thinking of. There's a time I had Max at Costco. He was a baby. He wasn't even walking. I had him in the cart where you're not supposed to put him.
Of course.
And I was like fishing out the receipt from my pocket and the fucking kid flipped out of the cart, landed on the ground from like 3.5 feet. And I just remember everybody in that place looking at me and people were just like, what's the number for CPS?
Exactly.
Did we call them and have them come here? I mean, he was fine. He landed mainly on his butt and not his head, but
mainly.
Quiet, please.
Yeah, it was not a great look. So anyway, I'm looking forward to my future supervised visits with my kids.
2.
Presents a truly terrible podcast. Welcome to Nonsense, Season 3, Episode 6. I'm Jeff Parker.
I'm Stu Little.
This is our take on the week's business, tech, and entertainment headlines. This time, we'll look at recent progress in supersonic travel.
Only by rail or by boat?
Mostly by boat. It's International Polar Bear Day. Polar bears are furry, majestic beasts that roam the cold Arctic ice. However, in the past few decades, sea ice in the Arctic has been melting at an alarmingly fast rate, leading the polar ice cap to shrink. Because of this, polar bears have been losing their habitats, their sources of food, and ultimately dying from starvation and exhaustion.
Yeah, they've been doing a lot more of those Coca-Cola ads, I think, just trying to make ends meet. Yeah, it's rough.
International Polar Bear Day aims to raise awareness of issues and encourage change.
I mean, I love the idea, right? I mean, I love the polar bears.
They're so cute.
I've never really gotten to know one, but they're well cute in a, like, I'm gonna rip your face off sort of way.
Well, they are bears.
But like, I don't know that International Polar Bear Day is going to do much more than the fact that there's like a 90-degree delta between Los Angeles and Minnesota right now.
In weather,
like 85 degrees here, and it's minus 20 or whatever the fuck it is there. So I feel like if that's not going to do it, I'm not sure the polar bears on
International Polar Bear Day is going to do it.
Is that it?
This will be the thing that finally makes it work. How's your week going?
My week has been great. I mean, up until now, when you got me now sad about the polar bears, but I'll get through it. It's my father's birthday, which is coming up. He's a listener to the show.
Oh, happy birthday to your dad.
He's getting up there in the years, and I decided spontaneously at dinner the other night when my dad was with us to play a little game that I like to call with the kids. Well, let's guess what is not older than grandpa.
What is not older than grandpa?
Like, let's just guess things that aren't older than grandpa. Yeah, because like they're little kids, right? Like they don't know a lot about like time. They have no idea how old he is.
Of course.
And it was great because they had like, your typical guesses of like a car or a motorcycle, and we don't know they were cars for that. Oh, traffic lights was one of the guesses. That was a good one.
Oh, good guess.
And then of course my kids, because they're both those apples didn't fall too far from the tree. One of them said dirt, which I thought was super funny. My oldest confirmed. He's like, well, I know what's not older than grandpa. Magma, because it was here when the Earth started. And I was like, yes, buddy, magma. But then they had some really funny ones. Like one of them was spork, and I had no idea. I was like, spork. First of all, what part of your hat did you pull spork out of? Yeah, and I had no idea. Do you know when the spork was invented? Do you have any idea when the spork was invented?
1963.
Yeah, I kind of guessed like the 50s. I have no idea. I don't know. I was like, this is like a post-war thing.
You think fast food would be what would usher it in,
combination,
right?
spoon, fork, you're in a hurry, whatever. It turns out it's like the 1870s.
But why?
How crazy is that?
There was no fast food in the 1870s. Why would they need a spork? You could actually go ahead and pick up the other utensil.
Well, because you had a guy whose name was Spork, and he had to do fucking something with it. I mean, it's like, what else is he going to do?
That's who invented it?
No, I think it was a doctor. It was like Samuel Francis was this dude. This is what Google told me.
Yeah.
And he patented this thing so that you could have a fork spoon. It was actually at the time, I think it was a fork spoon knife. It had a knife edge on one side.
Oh man.
So the OG Spork.
That sounds dangerous.
Yeah. And I guess Spork just doesn't roll right off the tongue. So anyway, it'll be a future segment. I can do a whole show on sporks.
So your father is not older than the spork.
He is not older than the spork. No, it's close, but 1874 I think was the year, so he's not quite there yet.
Also, I missed the answer. Was your father they're older or not older than traffic lights?
Traffic lights, well, what do you think, actually? That's a really good question. What do you think?
I don't know when traffic lights came to be. I would guess your father is probably maybe a little younger than traffic lights.
I kind of knew the traffic lights were older, not just because I had a brief inclination this was from the 1800s, which they were, but also cars were around well before that. And you figure you couldn't have had cars for very long.
I know, but they weren't lights. They were mechanical signs that told you to stop and go.
Oh, you had both. You did have both, right? You had mechanicals. Actually, you had mechanical turn indicators on cars. Have you ever seen those?
Oh, for sure.
Before they had blinky lights, they had like a little flag that would come out, which I thought was super nuts.
Right, well, happy birthday to your dad. That's really cool.
Anyway, that was my week. How about yours?
You and I have talked about this before.
Yeah?
The pink dot that you have on your driver's license in California that is supposed to signify if something happens to me, by all means, harvest all my parts.
Yes.
Harvest all my parts. Use my eyes. Use whatever I've got that somebody else can use, my liver, my whatever. You and I have talked about this. It's a falsity. It creates the illusion that this is what's going to happen. And really, all the pink dot does is show your intent. Right?
I wouldn't call it a falsity. I would call it a non-certainty.
Yeah.
It is not a certainty.
If I'm choosing the pink dot, I don't want to leave it up to my next of kin, which is what happens.
That's the whole point. That's why you pick the pink dots, so not leave it up to them.
Right. I didn't want to leave it up to, I wanted to make my wishes known. However, it turns out there is something you can do in California. You can go to Donate Life California. That takes you farther than the pink dot so that your next of kin don't have to make these decisions. So you say, this is absolutely what I want to happen to my remains. And I finally did it this week. I finally filled out the form. I found it.
You were able to submit it and everything all online?
Yeah.
That's impressive.
It's pretty great. I want to find some place where I can donate the rest of my body to science for the things you can't harvest and use. Go ahead and play with me in labs.
That'll be great.
Sure.
Hey, is it the nonsense guy? Oh yeah, fuck, let's make him say something funny for once. That'll be great. That's really cool that Donate Life California allowed you to do all that online. When I went there to try to donate my body, they acted more like a Goodwill on a Friday afternoon at 4:30 and said they were full.
They had too much stuff.
They're like, oh no, we don't need any more. Maybe try going down the hall. And I was like, hall? It's a website. What are you talking about? And then it said like no habla English, and I was just like in a Spanish page.
Go to ballast.com. They can use you.
I think they have large scales they need to test. I think you'll be really good for that. It's you and a walrus. That's how we're going to test the teeter-totter.
Anyway, I don't know how this works in other states, but in California, it's Donate Life California. I'm going to put the link in the show notes. If you are a pink dot person like I am, go ahead and put your information.
Just another terrible California killing their constituents.
Allowing their constituents to decide how they want their bodies to be used after their life
Harvesting
ends.
Body parts. Like I think what happens, I don't know this to be entirely factual, but I've heard on good authority that Newsom just uses those parts to build like benches and furniture.
Is that right? For his own use?
Yeah, for his own. Not even a park bench. Yeah. It's not even a fucking park bench. I'm a footstool in Newsom's goddamn mansion. Fuck.
How dare he?
I love the idea though of like, if there was a checkbox where I could be made into a park bench, that would be great. There'd just be like a dog just constantly chewing on like my femur. That's like the leg of the stool. This has gotten really macabre, really fast.
Very dark.
Here we are.
Let's move to a lighter subject.
Yes, please.
And get to our headline, singular. You notice
our singular headline?
You notice I'm just saying headline because
you're just being realistic.
This one's a complicated one and a big one.
Sure.
And it's a very important one.
Okay.
Apple has ceased offering advanced data protection, its end-to-end encrypted iCloud storage, to new UK users and will require existing users to disable it at some point in the future.
Okay.
This follows reports that UK security services demanded backdoor access to global user backups. That is everyone's user backups around the world. ADP, which protects iCloud data with user-controlled encryption, is being removed due to a UK government demand under the Investigatory Powers Act.
I mean, this makes sense. I've been married now for almost a decade. Every time I demand backdoor access, I am showing the door. So I got a thing. I got to go. I feel like maybe.
So this will be our last show then.
No, this will be the last show where I'm living at my house.
Yeah,
future shows will be recorded from the Motel 6 down the street. This is super interesting to me, right? So basically, the UK government has said we want to have access to all of the things Apple, it seems.
Everyone's data that Apple touches.
To be clear, we don't actually know what was asked because this is from an anonymous leak, and Apple isn't even allowed to disclose this, or they would face criminal charges if they disclosed the fact that this ask was made.
In the UK.
In the UK, yeah. So apparently, I don't know, maybe the British still think they own the entire planet. Do they know that the empire has gotten a little broken up in the past couple of years? I don't know.
We do this too, though.
All the time. But when we do it, it's okay.
We send these things that you have to comply with all the time, and you can't disclose the fact that you had this thing sent to you, which is horrible.
First of all, I love that Apple is making a stand on this, and they're doing it in a way that is very like, they're not saying why, they're just saying you no longer have ADP access in the UK.
Notice carefully, they're not complying with what the UK is asking for.
Well, they are and they aren't. They're not complying in that, yeah, sure, they're not giving them a back door. However, the end game is that they want ultimately to have access to this data. By not complying, the data is still there and presumably subpoenable to get access to because it's sitting on a server. And it doesn't seem far-fetched for Apple to be like, wait, you have no jurisdiction over a Brazilian citizen or a New Zealand citizen.
The gall of the UK that they think they can just make orders for the rest of the world is mind-blowing. Can Monaco just create laws that have to apply to all of us?
Yes. A lot of people don't know that.
Can Vatican City just decide all of us have to have red iPhones?
No, only the Catholics. No, they only control the Catholics, as it turns out.
Okay, now with the headlines. Up next, CJ is going to talk about flying fast, but without the noise.
Ooh, fast but no noise? So basically you're saying the exact opposite of Spirit.
I don't know, Spirit loud.
Spirit Airlines?
It's never been my experience.
Oh, Jesus Christ. It's like, imagine you were inside a trailer at a trailer park and everybody had way more meth than they needed. It's kind of like that.
I've only been on one Spirit flight, and I have to tell you, it was delightful.
Then how much?
I was upgraded to first class.
Sure.
And the entire flight was so lovely.
Listen, I'm going to tell you exactly what happened. I wasn't there, but here's what happened. The person at the check-in counter was like, sir, you don't belong here. We're going to go and put you at the front of the plane. Like, this is where you belong. We're going to put you up towards the front. We're going to give you the honey roasted peanuts as opposed to just the singular peanuts.
Again, my Spirit Airline experience is not the same as the rest of the world's, clearly. I had a great Spirit Airline experience. But I've only done it once.
If an airline were to offer me the ability to fly faster and with no noise, that is definitely a seat upgrade I would pay for.
And pay for it you will, because that's going to be expensive.
Well, I'm not opposed to that. Speaking of paying for things, have you ever paid for one of those phone calls from your seat, like on an airplane?
Way more times than I would like to admit.
How did you start that phone call?
I'm on an airplane, so I'm going to be talking at the speed of light.
Right? You every time I've used that phone, which is maybe only, I don't know, a dozen times, you would always in the first like 1.6 seconds tell, hey, I'm on an airplane, I got to go really fast. And then you would just fucking as fast as you could.
It was like $15 a minute or something.
At least. Yeah.
And this was like 20 years ago.
Totally. I mean, you could just like, they're just like, insert one more cougar on now. And you're like, what? I just got on the phone. I don't understand. Anyway, here's the thing. I don't know if you know this, but now you can make a phone call from nearly anywhere.
What?
Yes. And that's why I carry my new Nokia 9290 Communicator, a fully integrated mobile terminal that combines the portability of a wireless phone with the capabilities of a full-featured PDA.
Future boy, what are you saying?
I get more work done on the run without having to carry my whole office around because it's all on my Communicator.
Wow.
Now, this thing cracks open like a clamshell to reveal a full QWERTY keyboard, allows you to keep a sophisticated calendar, make up to a 5-way conference call with a hands-free speakerphone, and even view PowerPoint presentations.
Tiny PowerPoint presentations.
Very tiny, postage stamp size PowerPoint presentations. You can even send emails with attachments or surf the web with a real HTML browser that supports Java.
Oh my.
The Nokia 9290 Communicator on store shelves by early summer.
Can't wait.
I'm in.
Push this button.
Not on my Communicator. You'll probably break it.
I love when you talk about your passion for airplanes and the cool advances that are happening with airplanes.
Yep, mainly with the food.
And by the way, there's a big article in The Verge a couple days ago about the recent plane crashes. And what their conclusion was, don't be worried about plane travel yet.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's been some really exciting innovation I want to talk about in airplane travel, but the thing I'm really hoping for is just a buffet.
In the plane?
Like, I just want like an A380 with a buffet in the plane. Could you imagine how happy I'd be?
Yeah, I can.
Just getting up, going for more snow crab legs, coming back.
Have you flown JetBlue Mint yet?
I haven't. You always rave about it. I'm sure it sounds like it's lovely.
It's business class for like, Emirates or whatever. But if you're in the United States, it's like the nicest first class you've ever been in.
Really?
Yeah.
Nicer than like a Polaris?
Oh, yeah.
Because like occasionally you get the Polaris International connectors between like LA and New York or Newark. That's pretty good.
The only thing different is the amount of space that they give you. Literally, they give me a whole row for my fat, hiney to take up the entire, like what would normally be 3 seats. They call it the apartment.
Yeah. So you can just waddle over here or just plop on down here on this.
It's delightful.
Air supported.
It's actually kind of lonely because there's nobody to talk to.
Sure. You can only put one of you on one side of the plane. Otherwise, it's off balance.
Sure.
That's really the biggest problem. You have to make sure that you have a equal and opposite mast put on the other side of the plane.
But none of this is what you're going to talk about. What you're going to tell me about is speeding planes up.
Yes. Now, we did this before, you may remember, in the early days of Nonsense. This is like season 1, I think episode 19, like May of 2023. So a long time ago.
Yes.
We aired an episode that was called Planes That Go Boom. Do you You remember that?
Yes.
And our longtime listeners may recall that on that episode, we talked about how if aircraft speeds had continued to progress at the same rate since the 1970s, we'd be traveling at Mach 4 today.
Wow.
Which would be like basically LA to New York in under 2 hours.
Sure.
There was one wrinkle. Do you remember the wrinkle?
Well, it's expensive. It takes a lot of fuel.
Well, there's a bigger wrinkle than that.
It's also people who who live on the Earth don't want to hear that sound of you breaking the sonic barrier.
So related to that, 50 years ago, the federal government banned all civilian supersonic flights over land. So that was kind of a bit of a barrier.
Yeah, that'd slow you down.
And nobody really wanted to invest in this because you literally were not allowed to do it.
I think they had stopped using it anyway for cost reasons.
Well,
right?
So a little recap on this. Last Concorde flight was 2003.
Oh, it lasted longer than I remember.
Yeah, but I mean, it was on the decline. They didn't run many routes.
Yeah.
The couple Concorde issues they had, and certainly the Concorde disaster in France didn't help. But that was a post 9/11 world. I mean, it was not a great time for air travel at large.
Yeah.
But let's go back a little farther. So I think the context is useful for the story. We talked a bit about this in our Planes That Go Boom episode. Back in 1964, there was something called Operation Bongo 2. This was the one that we talked about this, where they began dropping 8 sonic booms per day, starting at 7 a.m. in the morning on Oklahoma City.
How lovely.
Yeah. So they were basically testing the sonic boom effect on people.
To see how pissed off they could make the people who had to hear them.
Well, so for the most part, and they did this at various, the first couple weeks, the first 12 weeks, they were only doing 1 to 1.5 pound force per square foot.
Oh my.
Which doesn't sound like a lot until you realize it's air pressure and you're like, fuck.
Sure.
That's a lot. And then they increased that to like 1.5 to 2 pounds per square feet. And this was, they thought this would be sort of what would be expected out of supersonic transport.
Okay.
We didn't know what we were doing. The Concorde was, it wasn't even in development yet. I think it was ideated, but it wasn't really it certainly didn't exist yet. And they did this in Oklahoma. And apparently the Oklahomans initially took this in stride. Like they were okay with it. And they knew sort of the predictability of when the booms would come. An FAA hired camera crew was filming a group of construction workers, and they were surprised to find the booms signaled their lunch break, which I think is comedy. Like the guys knew when to go on lunch.
They're using it as a clock.
Right? Totally works. But here's the thing. In the first 14 weeks, 147 windows in the city's 2 tallest buildings were broken.
Yeah, those can't be free to repair.
That's not great. And anyway, by like the late springtime, a bunch of civic groups had organized to fight this. They were sort of like rebuffed by the city politicians who asked them to show legislators their support, but the people were not super happy.
Understandable.
Of course. Yeah, the aviation community was racing to develop its understandings of supersonic shockwaves to sort of reduce the SST potential sonic boom noise levels.
SST, supersonic travel.
Supersonic travel, sorry, yeah, thank you. But those researchers couldn't outpace the speed at which environmental concerns and policy discussions were cropping up, threatening to ground the aircraft before it was even built. Now, for perspective, we're talking about this is the mid-60s. We had just gone supersonic for the first time ever as a species less than 20 years previous.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like we had a ton of time to study and understand this. So in the summer of 1968, I think this was really the beginning of the end for supersonic travel. On May 31st, during a ceremony at the Air Force Academy in Colorado, there was an F-105 Thunder Chief fighter that broke the sound barrier flying 50 feet over the school grounds, the Air Force Academy school grounds.
Yikes.
The sonic boom blew out 200 windows.
Sure.
From the Air Force Chapel and injured a dozen people.
Sure.
Which is bananas to think about.
What are you thinking doing it that close to the ground?
So, well, good judgment comes from experience. Experience comes from bad judgment. So they figured it out. And then like a week later, the New York Times published an editorial using the incident in Colorado to underscore the danger of sonic booms, and sort of what it presented to the nation's peace and well-being. And then in July of that year, so in this 1968, Congress directed the FAA to develop standards for, quote, control and abatement of aircraft noise and sonic boom.
A reasonable thing to control.
Yeah, and the point was the science hadn't really caught up.
But also flying 50 feet above the ground can't be safe.
Terrible idea.
Yeah.
Terrible idea.
Not a lot of margin for error there.
Yeah, you definitely accelerated the demise of supersonic transport by then.
And the demise of pilots. I mean, that can't be very safe. You have no margin for error.
Air Force Academy graduation, these guys are all, they're cowboys, right? Like, I get it.
They're hot dogs, sure.
It wasn't like it was a, United flight. But you had these public opinion surveys in cities where supersonic military jets were flown overhead, and many folks said they didn't like what they heard or the way their windows rattled because of the sonic booms. So within a couple years, the FAA formally proposed a rule that would restrict operation of civil aircraft at speeds greater than Mach 1. So that's basically anything above the sound barrier. And in May of 71, Congress canceled our US SST, which was a Boeing program.
Yeah.
And the rule banning civil supersonic flights over land went into effect 2 years later in 1973. So basically by the early 70s, you had all supersonic transport programs in the U.S.
over the U.S.
dead. they definitely pushed the pause button on supersonic travel within the U.S. There was some research at the time that suggested ways to soften the impact of sonic booms, but the technology of the 60s and 70s wasn't sophisticated enough to fully solve the problem in time. So basically the rule one, the science kind of, I wouldn't say stopped, but it definitely slowed down.
Sure.
And we've been in a world where you had the Concorde, which was a European-based design, collaboration between the French and the Brits. That flew for about 30 years. And then, as we mentioned earlier, that stopped in 2003. So you haven't had any commercial supersonic transport in over 20 years. It's not flying anywhere. So NASA's been working on this, and this is what's interesting. There's a Lockheed Martin project called the X-59. You can kind of pronounce it looks like QueSST, but it's really pronounced the QueSST.
Okay.
And this is the Quiet Supersonic Technology. It's an American program. It's developed by Skunk Works, so from Lockheed Martin, for NASA's Low Boom Flight Demonstrator project.
You can't get rid of the boom. You can just kind of abate it. You can just kind of reduce it.
Yeah. You can kind of get rid of it. That's what's so cool about this. So the X-59 was intended to fly supersonic, but with drastically reduced noise, so that people below would hear sonic thumps rather than booms,
right?
If they even hear anything at all. And to test this, the public's perception of the noise, part of the QueSST plan included flying the X-59 over several communities to survey how people react. So kind of similar to Operation Bongo.
Sure.
Fortunately, I think they're not calling it Operation Bongo, which also helps.
But a thump instead of a boom.
Yeah, and that was part of the goal, the sort of design goal. Preliminary design started in February of 2016. The X-59 planned to begin flight testing in 2021. Of course, they had some delays, but as of now, January 2025, it's planned to be delivered to NASA for flight testing this year. And it's expected to cruise at around Mach 1.4 at an altitude of 55,000 feet, creating a low, what they call 75 effective perceived noise level thump to evaluate supersonic transport. Okay, cool.
So really quiet, really quiet. But back up, you're blowing over something I think that's really important here.
Yeah.
The altitude, which is the trick here.
Yeah.
They're flying at 55,000 feet. That's way higher than we normally fly commercial aircraft.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know enough about their test program to know where else they're testing it, but that was the initial design goal to figure out what this looks like. But I've got, there's more to this, so buckle up, Buttercup. Okay. So in November of 2018, NASA began testing over 2 weeks to gather feedback, and they did sort of 8 thumps a day at different locations, monitored by 20 noise sensors, and described by 400 residents receiving a whopping $25 per week compensation.
Wow, they can retire.
So they basically said, they did like their own little Nielsen, right? They're just like, hey, tell us what you hear. They took an FA-18 Hornet, and it would dive from 50,000 feet to briefly go supersonic with this sort of reduced shock wave over Galveston, Texas, right? That's the island in off Texas.
Sure.
And they try to make this boom over land and a stronger boom over water. Now, this is 2018. By this time, they'd already started making the X-59. They're already machining the first parts here in Palmdale, California. By December of 2020, construction was halfway completed, with the first flight then planned for 2022. NASA had reported the installation of the General Electric engine in November of 2022. At this time, X-59's first flight was initially planned for 2024. So it was already slipping a couple years.
Sure.
You had a pandemic in there. You've got just naturally trying to build something that no one else has built before.
It's complicated.
But what I'm excited to share is that the X-59 has been conducting ground-based test of its afterburner, which is the afterburner, for folks that don't know, is a system that injects extra fuel into the hot exhaust of a jet engine to basically make it go faster. They've been doing this for the past 2 months. They've been testing this, which tells me that this thing is likely going to fly this year.
The Batmobile had an afterburner.
Yes, it did. Yes, you're right. It did.
I want an afterburner for when people are tailgating me.
Leno has this awesome plate frame. He's got a motorcycle that runs off a Bell helicopter turbine engine. It's mounted on a motorcycle. Okay. And he's got a license plate frame around it that says, "Please stay back, extremely hot jet wash."
Sure.
Because it's not an afterburner, but what's coming out of the turbine is so fucking hot, it'll just melt the front clips of cars that are following behind them. It's really funny.
If you're close enough to read this plate frame,
yeah, exactly,
you may evaporate.
X-59, I suspect it's going to fly sometime this year, and I think they're going to see very favorable results based on what I've read. That's super exciting. However, that's not really what I want to talk about.
Well, thank goodness at 11 minutes into this story, you're finally getting to what you want to talk about.
It's the background. I want to tell you about the other things that are happening. Here's what I want to talk about. So the QueSST isn't the only aircraft testing how modern engineering can help decrease sonic booms. There's companies such as Hermeus, Spike, Boom, and Exosonic have all been exploring return to commercial supersonic travel under the premise of a more quieter and more comfortable passenger flight. I've been following this company, Boom Technologies. You may have heard them referred to as Boom Supersonic. They're out of Colorado. They're designing a supersonic airliner named the Overture.
We talked about this in season 1.
We did, briefly. The Overture targets hauling 64 to 80 passengers, depending on configuration, at supersonic speeds.
It's all things related to symphonies, all their names.
Yes, I know.
It's like Overture and Symphony.
Sound. I mean, I'm sure their mini plane will be called the Decibel.
It's very clever.
So they want to move a bunch of people, right? They're talking about like commercial aviation as fast as Mach 1.7 over water and more importantly over land, which now takes us back to the whole ban. How do you get around this ban? But without having those routes over land, you don't have enough segments to make these things really commercially viable.
Yeah.
And Boom believes that if they can fly this thing over land, there's a market for somewhere between 1,000 to 2,000 supersonic airliners serving 500 viable routes, targeting fares comparable to that of business class, which is super interesting to me, right? You're probably going to give up a little comfort over business class,
sure,
but you're going to cut your time by 50% in your transit time.
By the way, if Boeing is not going to be an ongoing viable business, I need Boom or somebody to make an aircraft in the U.S.
Yeah, I mean, you still need Boeing to make an aircraft, right? Or make multiple aircraft, you hope. But yes, I agree. So, okay, as of 2017, this is at the Paris Auto Show, Boom had a backlog of 76 commitments with significant deposits. As of 2017, this was being treated somewhat seriously. United Airlines announced in 2021 that it had signed a deal to purchase 15 with an option to buy 35 more. American Airlines announced in August of 2022 that it agreed to purchase 20 Boom Overture aircrafts. So there is real momentum behind wanting this, because I think as a carrier, you don't want to not have this, right? When these things come out and exist. Just this month, February of 2025, as we're recording this, Boom completed flight testing of their 1/3 scale demonstrator. This is the Boom XB1, or more colloquially called the Baby Boom. The XB1 began taxi testing in like December of 2022, so really not that long ago. It conducted its maiden flight last year, March of 2024. It's flown 10 subsonic flights since March. And then here's where it gets really interesting to me. It went supersonic for the first time on January 28th of 2025. So this was a couple weeks ago, basically.
Yeah.
This is a big deal. This makes the XB-1 the first privately developed civil aircraft that has broken the sound barrier over the continental United States. That's a pretty big deal. This was with no real government. It wasn't like a NASA program. This was a privately developed aircraft that broke the sound barrier. It made a second supersonic flight on February 10th, after which the demonstrator aircraft was retired, which is kind of nuts to think about, because you're like, well, wait, you did 2 sets of supersonic flights and then you retired the aircraft. Why?
So it could spend more time with its grandkids.
After the XB-1's testing was completed, Nick, I'm going to butcher his last name here, Sharika, who's Boom's chief flight test engineer, said, quote, "We have achieved here with this flight test program what everyone thought previously was impossible, that a startup cannot do a supersonic airplane by themselves without the help of the government, without the help of the larger OEM or some other organizations. What we have done now 6 times is shown the world that we can design, develop, test safely a supersonic airplane."
Yeah.
Boom's supersonic founder and CEO, this guy Blake Scholl, he said during the webcast of the flight, he said that this is the last time she'll fly. He added sort of after a pause, during which it sounded like he even got a little bit choked up. This was a big deal for them, right? This is like a big crossing over. He said, quote, "While it's incredibly sad for me to leave the exciting world of flight testing experimental aircraft, it means we get to go all in starting tomorrow on what we started the company to do, which is to build that Overture airliner. Our goal is to be making thrust on those engines around the end of this year, start building the first Overture in about 18 months, roll it off the line in about 3 years, and put it in the air in less than 4. He said that their goal is to be ready for passengers by the end of 2029.
Yeah.
So the point is, they've tested and they've sort of achieved what they needed to achieve with that. And you go, well, what was it, just going supersonic? Like what was the thing that you had to do? And to your point, why did you retire it after only 6 supersonic flights across 2 separate days of testing?
Because once you've proven you can fly with no boom,
yes,
you're pretty much done. Now you can make it commercial.
I suspect most people would find the prospect of supersonic air travel pretty damn compelling, right? Imagine New York to LA in 4 hours instead of 5 hours, 50 minutes, Seattle to Miami in 3 hour 40 instead of 5 hour 15, or Miami to LA in 3 hours and 20 instead of 5:10. That's awesome. But that's not the coolest part of what the XB1 achieved. Jeff just hinted at it.
I get on JetBlue Mint. I put my little eye shade thing down, my little...
You just go sleepy time.
For me, the flight is instant. Yeah. And I guess it's unimportant what airline I'm on.
Well, yeah, you time travel. I tell this to my kids all the time.
I time travel.
When they're complaining about how long the drive is, I tell them to just take a nap and you can time travel. You just wake up in the other place.
It's fantastic.
Which, by the way, it's really cute when they wake up and like, Daddy, I just time traveled. I'm like, you sure did. Daddy didn't, because he's been driving the fucking car for the past 5 hours. Here we are.
Daddy lived every minute twice.
Yeah. Well, no, they were quiet. So it was, it could have been worse. So that's not the coolest part of what the XB1 achieved. To me, the coolest part is what Jeff just highlighted. And as a self-described aviation dork / fanboy, I've been following the XB1 for a while. I knew they had an upcoming supersonic testing. I knew they were flying the plane out of the Mojave Air and Spaceport, which is a place I drive by often. It's just north of Los Angeles. It's a really cool spot. I was curious where they'd be flying this thing because per that 1971 ban I mentioned earlier, you can't fly.
How do you get clearance?
You can't fly supersonic over land in the U.S.
Yeah.
It's not just about getting a waiver. There's no place that you're allowed to fly. So I doubted they'd take the XB1 out over the ocean, which would be an option. You could fly out, 10, 20, 30 miles out over the ocean. You need more fuel. I don't know how much fuel that thing can handle. You don't want to be in a test plane far from airports, especially not over the water. That just sounds bad.
Sure.
Right? Like you want to have options.
Well, you want to hear what this thing sounds like. That's the whole point.
Well, you can put tugboats out there and see what you hear. So I dug around and I found the FAA had granted Boom an exemption to fly within the confines of a pre-existing supersonic corridor within what is known as the R-2508 airspace complex. Okay. And this is used for daily military aircraft supersonic testing all the time. Specifically, Boom wanted to fly in the Black Mountain Supersonic Corridor, which I'm already familiar with, as there are hundreds of supersonic flights flown there every year. And this area happens to overlap with places I camp in throughout the year. It's just north of Palmdale. It's basically adjacent to Edwards.
Oh, okay.
It's in sort of the vicinity of Edwards. And I was very excited to just go out and try to witness hearing this thing breaking the sound barrier. Like I wanted to be a part of that and see that because I thought it'd be super cool. Unfortunately, the timing didn't work out for me. I just couldn't make it when they were flying it, other things going on. But here's the best part. While I was bummed at first that I missed it, I actually didn't miss anything.
It's nothing to hear.
Because of the 3 sonic booms they generated, right, in their last set of flights, none were audible from the ground.
Yeah.
That's what ultimately they were trying to test.
Yeah.
All this buildup was to go supersonic to see what would happen. And this is why Boom is so confident that supersonic passenger flights can come back.
Sure.
Because if you're not making a noise, or at least if you can't hear a noise on the ground, then what's the point of the ban? And that's what I believe they're going to prove, or what they've proved with the XB1, what they're going to achieve with Overture. And this is the really lead of the past 20 minutes we've been talking here. There's something called a Mach cutoff altitude, above which audible sonic boom waves will refract upwards off layers in the atmosphere and never reach the ground, which is awesome. The trick is the exact speed and altitudes vary based on atmospheric conditions, such as temperature gradients and winds.
Sure.
This is what the CEO and their chief flight test officer explained during that live stream. The cutoff altitude, when they flew this a couple weeks ago, the cutoff altitude was about 7,000 feet. So if you're below 7,000 feet, you won't hear it, which is incredible. So if you're flying higher than that and the sound wave bounces at 7,000 feet, unless you're sitting at 8,000 feet in your cabin, you're not going to hear it. Yeah. That to me is super cool. And what I was trying to say is, to me, like commercial aviation has sort of stalled out since the 60s. Like at least through my eyes, the 747 is probably the last big exciting improvement in commercial aviation. Mm-hmm. Like everything else has been more efficient. Like the fact that you can take 2 engines across the ocean has been a massive technological improvement, but like not really exciting to the end consumer.
Yeah.
Like until, when the Queen of the Skies came out, that was pretty cool. And then we flew that thing for 40 years.
We've gotten less sexist.
Yes, you're right. We've gotten less sexist.
That was a good improvement.
That's really the takeaway of all of this, is now you can be the queen or the jester of the skies. To be fair to the A380, the sheer physics of that thing is impressive. Like just the fact that air can hold that thing up somehow is magic. And like I understand how all the physics works.
You're flying a dirigible. You're flying a massive dirigible practically.
It's like
with
bigger
wings.
than that. Yeah, that thing is just and unless you're buying one for personal use, which I don't know if Taylor Swift has bought one yet for personal use, I'm assuming she will at some point. There's very little exciting about the experience in that thing. I mean, yeah, they've got private cabins, whatever, but like that has not been terribly interesting to me. So since the 747, I feel like what we're seeing here with the XB1 from Boom, even with the QueSST X59, there's going to be other companies making supersonic airliners. I'm pretty damn confident that we're going to see accessible commercial air travel by 2030. And I know this wasn't a predictions episode. Probably should have thought of this then.
Say that again. Accessible commercial air travel.
I'm pretty confident that we're going to see accessible commercial air travel by 2030 or so.
Can I just add one word that I think you want to have in there?
Cost effective?
No.
Accessible.
Accessible commercial air travel that is supersonic.
Oh, yeah. Oh, God damn it.
Because the other thing we kind of have.
Both could be true. You're also going to be able to go to Southwest in 2030. Commas. How do they work? Okay, so my point here that I'm saying is I'm pretty confident that we're going to see accessible commercial supersonic air travel by 2030 or so.
Great.
Now, you're also going to see subsonic air travel in 2030. That's not going to go away.
That will continue.
Right?
That will continue.
I can't wait.
By the way, that's still more economical because the amount of fuel that's required to get you to supersonic speeds.
Yeah, we're trading money for time.
You're trading money for time.
Yeah,
right.
of course. But a bus is more economical than a fucking airplane. Are you taking a bus?
That's true.
I mean, you could also walk. You could really reduce your carbon footprint by walking.
I like walking.
Like there are gradients. I get though that you are, amount of fuel spent per mile traveled, passenger mile traveled is probably not going to be as efficient as subsonic travel, but it's still going to be more efficient than subsonic travel of 20, 30 years ago.
Oh, sure.
It's certainly an improvement. I know that's I'm cherry picking there in my comparative, but
yes, you are.
Yeah. I mean, you really want to talk about the things that are probably the worst net polluters. It's all the giant tanker ships, right? Those things are terrible, but you're moving lots of heavy stuff. You just move it really slowly. Well, I think this is amazing. I think the concept of having a supersonic plane that I can buy a ticket for without, Blue Origin-esque money, that I can buy a ticket for in 5 years is incredible. And I do believe we're going to see that. And that's pretty awesome.
No, that's great, especially for transatlantic flights, for really long flights.
Yeah.
If I want to fly to Australia, that would be super useful. The idea of not taking 15 hours to get to Australia would be
but even flying to New York, I think people that are commuting back and forth to New York, why you're still doing that is a separate question. But
New York's 5 hours. I can sleep through that.
It's 6 hours from LA. It depends which way you're going. You got some wind going in one direction.
Yeah.
But okay, if you can take 50% off that, 43%, I'm down for that. Now, hold on. This is just supersonic V1.
Oh, I know. Of course.
Right? You're talking about like 1.4, 1.7 Mach. So 1.4, 1.7 times the speed of sound.
When you get to Mach 4, you've really got something.
Yeah. And there is a program, they're ideating what a Mach 4 airliner would look like. And you got to start here, right? Because really the boom is the part that's been keeping us from doing this. You've got to, I think once you prove that the boom is a thump or the boom isn't heard by most of the populace, then you can start traveling supersonic. Then you start to ratchet it up. Yeah. And then we can get back to where like maybe we get on track to delivering a Mach 4 jetliner. That would be insane. Like Mach 4 would be nuts. You'd be here to New York in less than 2 hours. That's incredible.
Yeah, no, that's great.
And then we interconnect those airports with hyperloops.
No.
Boring company.
High-speed rail.
High-speed rail. Oh, it's always got to come back to high-speed rail. You don't want to make a vacuum that goes for 12,000 miles?
I don't think it's possible.
Well,
I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but I don't think it's possible.
I've seen the movie Contact. You can build anything. You just need enough money, time, and dedication.
If you're going to get to Mach 4, probably you're not going to get to Mach 4 fast enough for me to enjoy it. But my kid might love traveling at Mach 4.
Yeah, Mach 4.
My disappointment is not with the technology or the rate at which the technology is coming.
Sure.
My disappointment is with my age and the rate at which the technology is coming.
Well,
I would love to see all this stuff.
Once I get you trained up and built into an AI, I'll just tell the AI and it's sort of like you'll know. You'll still be there.
Great.
Someone's got to host this show with me.
Okay.
I think it's super exciting. I think it's really interesting to see how far this has progressed in such a short period of time. And this idea of like, hey, we can build this thing. We believe we can make a plane that will not disrupt everyday life on the ground. That's pretty cool. That's pretty compelling.
Yeah, no, that's great. The thing I don't quite agree with Scholl on is, he's saying it's all privately funded and they figured it all out privately and all of this. Well, yeah, but you got to stand on the shoulders of an awful lot of public funding.
Of course. I get that. Everybody's standing on the folks that came before them, for sure.
Yeah.
I appreciate that, right? And I'm sure that they've gotten a little bit of help along the way throughout there, for sure.
I don't think you ever want to forget that.
Yeah, and my read on this hasn't been that has been like they're not highlighting this as, hey, we've done this all ourselves with no one's help. We're not going to share with anybody. Generally speaking, the aviation community does a pretty good job of sharing information, especially safety data, and making sure that we can all move this forward together. I'm just excited that they've done this. Of course, these plans. No one ever says they're going to launch a plane in 2018 and then they deliver it 2 years early. That never happens. I get it.
And you wouldn't necessarily want to fly on it if they did.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to fly.
What exactly did you cut out in the dev process?
And you got to raise money, so it's a little easier if you say 6 years instead of 8 years. I get all of that, but the fact that we got there is just a testament to engineering to me. That it works. The process works. All those ground tests where I'm sure they found stuff that wasn't, nominal and they fixed and then put this thing in the air with a human. By the way, this wasn't flown as a drone.
Yeah, sure.
It had a real test pilot in it. To me, it's just incredible. And the fact that they did that without getting a giant government check dropped right into their lap is pretty cool. It's something I think they certainly should be proud of.
And it's the next decade to me that's going to be the more exciting one about this.
When it gets fully commercialized?
When it gets commercialized and it starts going even faster than 1.4, 1.7.
Yeah, look, I'm super excited about that. When you get into, I think that starts to touch on hypersonic travel. Then you just have to deal with there's physics complications you have to deal with.
Sure.
The sound barrier is hard, but then you start getting into these faster engines and you get the optimal engine design for supersonic travel is the exact opposite of what you want for subsonic travel.
Sure.
And if you want that vehicle to be able to do both, because you don't necessarily want a tow truck to have to pull it into supersonic travel, then there's all sorts of oddities you have to deal with. And the engineering is fascinating. Know that in a lot of these supersonic engines, one of the tricks they use, you need to cool the inlet charge, right? You're going so fast, the air's coming in super hot.
Friction from air molecules.
And it's super hot. Guess what it doesn't do when it's super hot? It doesn't like to explode, right? You've lost some of the energy in the air. Yeah. So they cool the air down. Do you know how they cool the air down?
Big carrier air conditioner strapped to the wings.
Kind of, except it's full of fuel. They use the fuel to cool the air charge and heat the fuel.
Oh, that's interesting.
So the fuel now gets a closer temp to its explosion temperature, but it cools the air charge using the fuel, which is genius.
Yeah.
Until you realize you've got like a bunch of thin titanium tubes getting slammed with shit from the air.
Yeah.
Just hoping like one of those doesn't break open. Like, I mean, the engineering is insane.
Yeah, I mean, that's such an efficient use.
The thing you're going to burn is the thing you use. Yeah, it's great. But like, you think of all the engineering complications coming around that. And it's like, oh man, like let's not look in Pandora's box there. Let's just get on the plane and assume it just gets to Mach 4 via unicorn blood and leprechaun tears. I think when you start getting like turbofans on planes and then you're like, wait, where's all the fuel? Oh, it's in the wings? Oh, okay.
Right.
Really? Is that where you want it? Is that really the best place for it? You're like, yep.
That's where it has to be.
I know, it's kind of where it has to be.
You don't have much choice.
You're like, how do you get the fuel from one side to the other? Oh, there's a pump. What happens when that breaks? Oh, we just land. What? Like, huh? I don't know. This all sounds terrible.
A commercial airplane is a giant kludge.
Yeah, but it's a really made kludge. Like, it's a really well made, that kludge has been refined and refined and refined.
Oh, sure.
What I find more interesting is when they talk about, and I watch some older design videos on aircraft, and they're like, oh, on this plane, we're going to do something brand new. We're going to put in 2 separate control systems. And I'm like, wait a minute. Have you implied that a bunch before that only had one control system? And you're
There's
like,
just been the one? Yes, exactly.
Yep.
There's been zero redundancy. If one goes out, that's all there was.
And I guess back then when you have things that are more, it's more like hardwired circuitry and hydraulic links, like, oh, maybe that's okay until one of those things fails.
No, it's still not
really
okay.
It's really not. Yeah. So, but I love the redundancy they built in. You got separate umbilicals going down the plane on separate sides.
Yeah.
I mean, it's incredible. So anyway, this is going to be neat. I'm really curious to see how supersonic travel will be embraced by Southwest.
Yes.
That's what I'm most excited about. If they're going to
short haul flights that go really fast,
load from front to back. I don't know, back to front. Do I still get the peanuts?
And there's just less of them because you have less time to eat them. I'm looking forward to the decade after this one. Yes, we must have this decade to get where we are now. The decade after this one is, in terms of travel, that's going to be amazing.
Do you think when Blake unveiled the plane, he should have taken a page out of Tim Cook's book and said, this is the fastest plane we've ever built? Just every year, it's a faster plane. I know there's some other upper limit, of course, that you're going to hit real soon. But it seems like getting across Mach 1 is the first big barrier you got to cross. And then you're going to be in the high Mach 1s. Like I do think these early planes are going to be doing somewhere between 1.4 and 1.7, and that's pretty cool. And then what's next? It's probably not 2. It's probably like
4,
2.5 or 3 or Mach 4, right? And that's amazing to me.
What happens when you hit a bird and you're doing Mach 1.4?
Everybody dies.
Pretty much, right?
I mean, you're not traveling at that speed until I think you're at a altitude that you're away from all of the things.
You're not going to hit anything.
I don't think you want to be someplace where, hopefully there's no Chinese weather balloon floating across the horizon, because that would be super bad.
Or even U.S. weather balloon. We released tons of weather balloons over
any weather balloon. Yeah. As it turns out, you crash the same when you hit any weather balloon of any origin.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, the things that are going to be up there are things that you're likely going to be able to be big enough you'll be able to see on radar. Or they'll have some positioning system. But you want to be at a level where that's not going to happen. Because if you were to hit an object or some asshole flying a drone at 30,000 feet, I'm pretty sure it's game over for everyone involved.
Everybody.
Like there's no glancing blow.
And not even pieces of glass. Yeah. You just turn right back to sand.
Yeah, exactly. Just plasma sand rains back to Earth. I'd also like to point out that all of the things during that breakup are all going to make little sonic booms on their way down when they cross over.
Of course. Little teeny tiny sonic booms.
Not to be dark about it, but hey, at least you go out making a sonic boom. Anyway, on that note, supersonic travel.
All right, on that happy note, we have to get out of here, but quickly before we do, have you seen or read anything good this last week?
I have. I came across this video from 2016, so about 8-ish years ago. And this was a school-sponsored slam poetry competition.
How fun.
Yeah, this 8th grader from Atlanta, Georgia. His name's Royce Mann. He wrote and performed a poem called White Boy Privilege, and of course ended up taking home first place.
Sure.
I'll put the link to these in the notes. As you would expect, the comments are riddled with a mix of supportive words that were certainly appreciated by the poster, which I think is Royce's mom, but also a metric shit ton of the trolling and the hate speech and the abusive and bullying language.
Oh, I'm sure.
So his mom turned off comments on most of the videos that she posted.
Yeah.
But the few that are still on are just like this interesting walk down 4chan lane.
That's too bad.
It's kind of terrible, but the video show is spectacular. Yeah. I'll link to both his original performance from the school, which is not well produced.
I will vouch for what you're saying because I've seen it.
Have you seen
it's
it?
Great.
Oh, it's great.
Yes.
It's really great. There's a better produced version I'll post as well where they actually sat him down at like a desk and put a proper camera on him. They're only a couple minutes long, but if you like this show of ours here on Nonsense, I suspect you'll enjoy seeing his performance and hearing his words. It's pretty cool.
For sure.
How about you? What have you seen?
Bad Monkey, produced by Bill Lawrence, the guy behind Ted Lasso and Shrinking.
Yeah.
Vince Vaughn stars in the series as Detective Andrew Yancey, a former police detective who's been reduced to conducting restaurant inspections in South Florida. A severed arm found by a tourist pulls Yancey into a world of greed and corruption that decimates the land and environment both in Florida and the Bahamas.
Yeah.
Natalie Martina is the delightful Rosa. The show's from the 2013 novel of the same name by Carl Hyacin. You should know this is nothing like Ted Lasso or Shrinking, but it's still a terrific black comedy crime drama.
One, I'm glad that the universe is back to a stable state where you're back to plugging Apple TV. That makes me happy.
This was the show I was having trouble watching.
Oh, really?
I would have jittering problems. I got used to letting it buffer a little before I started watching it.
Huh. I'm a big fan of most all the Bill Lawrence stuff, especially since I know some people that work on his shows with them.
This is nothing like Ted Lasso or Shrinking.
Totally different.
And I watched it because of Ted Lasso and Shrinking, thinking, well, it's going to be like that.
I mean, I love Vince Vaughn, too. Vince Vaughn's great.
Oh, my gosh. Vince Vaughn slam dunks this performance. It's so good. He's really funny.
When I think about this, I'm like, I don't know which would I want to wish upon myself first? Having to do restaurant inspections or having to be in South Florida? Certainly not both of them.
Yeah,
I don't know which one. I'm like, I think I'd rather do restaurant inspections in Philadelphia. That feels like a less painful experience than just living in South Florida. But
you want to be a restaurant inspector in Yountville.
Yeah, of course. I gotta go check French Laundry again, make sure everything's okay. Did you go there last week? Well, yeah, but it's been a week. Of course, I need to go over there.
Just keep testing.
Waddle in there.
Gotta make sure that's perfect.
Bad Monkey's been on my list for a while. I have not seen it yet, which is shameful to admit, but I do need to check this out. So thank you for pushing me.
Yeah. They just got a green light for season 2, so there's another one coming.
Oh, cool. I didn't know that. That's great.
Highly recommended. Bad Monkey season 1 on Apple TV now.
I will certainly check that out.
That is the episode.
Thank you for joining us for all of this nonsense. Truly terrible podcast from The Awful Company. Visit us on the web at nonsense.productions. I'm Stu Little.
I'm Jeff Parker.
If you like this program, please follow, download, subscribe, and like at Apple Podcasts, YouTube Music, Amazon Music, AntennaPod, iHeartRadio, Spotify, my favorite, Overcast, or wherever you may get your podcasts from.
Nonsense is brought to you by the Black Bean Growers of Northern Wyoming, a nutritional powerhouse brimming with antioxidants, essential nutrients, protein and fiber, and naturally low in fat. Utterly satisfying, dive into the deep, earthy flavor of black beans, the perfect addition to any meal. And of course, nobody produces them better than the Black Bean Growers of Northern Wyoming. Special thanks to our floor director, John Abelnor.
Well, thank you, John. We'll be here every Thursday morning for more nonsense. Please join us. I just want to be clear. We hit up literally every state's Growers Association of black beans, and nobody wanted to participate except for the Northern Wyoming black bean growers, which are like 3 guys.
They are saints up there in Northern Wyoming.
By the way, do not bring up pinto beans when you're talking to them. It really pisses them off.
They do not speak to the pinto bean growers.
Fucking beanologists. We do a whole show on beans, apparently.
Oh, please, let's go on.
Enough about supersonic travel. We need more beans episodes. Can you do another episode on legumes? We would love some legumes episodes.
Let's get on that right away.